In the wake of the Charleston church shooting, the presidential candidates are now being thrust into a debate about race. The accused shooter says he specifically targeted black people in a black church, and authorities found a racist manifesto that he posted online. But many of the Republican candidates have been slow to call the murders a racist act. Many initially said it was religiously motivated or they didn't know what compelled someone to do something like that. Turns out Ben Carson, the only black candidate running this year, is calling out his Republican competitors. In an op-ed he wrote for USA Today, Carson said, quote, "There are people who are claiming that they can lead this country who dare not call this tragedy an act of racism, a hate crime, for fear of offending a particular segment of the electorate." Race and racial issues also clearly on the mind of President Obama. The president shocked a lot of people when he used the actual N-word during a podcast with comedian Mark Maron. Here's the clip.
Racism. We are not cured of.
Clearly.
And it's not just a matter of it not being polite to say in public.
All of this brings us full circle back to South Carolina and the debate over the Confederate flag flying on the grounds of the State House. There's a renewed push to remove it, and Republican Governor Nikki Haley is now calling for that. There is a lot to unpack with all of these issues that we've piled into one segment here. I want to start with the Ben Carson quote. And Jessica, as the Republican at the table, let me start with you. Should Republican candidates be calling this a racist attack and a hate crime? And is Carson right when he says they're not saying that because they don't want to offend a segment of the electorate?
I don't know that I would go that far. You can't really, I don't think it's fair to attribute motives to somebody, but it was fairly obvious pretty quickly that this was a racist act. I've heard a lot of debates, about whether or not it should be called an act of terror, that calling it a hate crime isn't strong enough. People were upset about that. I mean, I don't know how productive that debate is. I think it was very obvious that it was racist. People should be able to label that for what it is. I think this guy should get the death penalty. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting.
But is it counterproductive to the conversation for Republican candidates not to go there? You and I both seem to think it was a racist attack.
You have to go there. I mean, look, this is even the debate over the flag. There were some candidates over the weekend saying, well, this isn't an issue that presidential candidates should weigh in on. And I do disagree with that. I think this is something that obviously has affected the entire nation. It's a deeply emotional issue, and it has to be part of the conversation. So I don't think you can stand there and say, I'm running for president, but this isn't something that the office of the president needs to address.
Jeannie, I went back through election results, going back through 1976. I just didn't have time to go back
any
further.
You are such a nerd.
I really am. I really am. No Republican candidate for president has gotten more than 83% of the black vote in every presidential election from 1976 all the way through 2012. And the last two were 91 and 95% or something to that effect. How much emphasis, how much push is there, given those numbers, for Republicans to not offend that segment of the electorate that Ben Carson says they were trying to avoid?
It's really interesting. So you look at what happened when they removed the Confederate flag in South Carolina from the top of the dome and put it in this memorial, and that was that bipartisan compromise. The governor who pushed for that lost his re-election bid, a Republican governor, because he was deserted by conservative whites and black voters would not go near him. We've seen that repeat itself over and over and over again. In 2000, John McCain famously said, keep the Confederate flag there, and then came back after he lost the primary to George W. Bush and said it was the worst mistake he ever made, and he did that out of fear of losing the electorate. So, Republican candidates are in this terrible bind. And the Republican Party, I think it's incumbent on the Republican Party to say, look, you don't move the flag, we're not going to hold our primary there, at least as the first in the nation. And they help these candidates make what has to be a decision where they're not shooting themselves in the foot. I agree with Jessica. This is absolutely a crime of race, and I think it's domestic terrorism. And candidates have to call it out. They cannot be put in a position of having to say, this isn't something that I need to speak to, which is what a lot of what we heard over the weekend.
South Carolina, as you mentioned, is the third state that votes in the primary process.
The first Southern primary.
Right, Iowa, then New Hampshire, then South Carolina. Do you think that this is a calculated move by some of the Republican candidates not to try to offend those voters in South Carolina?
It's disgusting, but absolutely. They're caught in a bind. If you want to be president and you're a Republican, South Carolina is a wall for you. You've got to do well there. If you can't, you probably can't win. We know that. It's the first Southern primary. They can't go in and say the things they need to say, and the party should step up and save them from being in this position.
I'm sorry, that's like making an argument that conservatives are just inherently racist, which I think is is really offensive. I mean, you can have opinions about, I thought Nikki Haley laid it out very well today and said, look, this flag is not a symbol of racism to many people. It has other meanings, and you can understand how people would be offended by it. I thought she presented the argument very well, but to just inherently say that you have to cater to what, the racist segment of the Republican Party, that's absurd.
So you believe that somebody like John McCain in 2000, who came back and said, I did that to win and it was a mistake, you think he didn't do it to cater to a conservative white primary vote in South Carolina? Absolutely, they all do. And I'm not saying Republicans are inherently racist.
It was a Republican governor that tried to get the flag down in the first place, and the Democrat running against him made that a huge campaign issue.
That was my original point. He got killed in the re-election bid for doing that. The conservatives
but the Democrat is the one that was fighting to get it back up there. So why are you attributing it just to the Republican Party?
All of which suggests that what President Obama did on the Marin radio show was appropriate and was necessary and was timely, because it would be naive to suggest that casual racism when folks are amongst themselves and people who look like them, that this language doesn't come up. It probably does, and as the first African-American president and as a black male, he was within his rights to discuss this in a receptive, appropriate, friendly media environment.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, it is not just an accident that we have all Republican candidates out there for the first 48 hours after this tragedy. All of us know this was an attack, a racial attack. And that was my point.
It is a been on this. She's been totally silent. She has not said one word about the Confederate flag. Where has she weighed in on that?
She absolutely said it should come down. She said that in 2007. Are you kidding? I mean, I agree with you. In Arkansas, when she was first lady, she didn't step up. But in 2007, she said it. She said it again. But my point is not that Republicans are racist. My point is that you are in a Republican primary in South Carolina. You guys, as strategists, know full well whatever you want to say. You would not advise your candidate to go out there and say that in the first 24 hours because you'd get killed. That's what they're being told, and that's what they're doing.
Which is why what Nikki Haley doing is both brave and she's taking one for the team.
Absolutely. But the Republican Party should step up and not have their candidates in that position because it's an awful position to put them in.
But they are. They're coming out. Listen, they're in those first moments. I think we can all agree, whenever you work for an elected official, you have to be very careful about what you say before all the facts are in, because you don't want to be caught holding the bag and promoting false statements or things that turn out not to be true. You never want to be in that position. I'm not arguing that they shouldn't be completely firm on this issue. It's very obvious of what the motivation was. It's unequivocal.
It diminishes the issue of, clearly, look, there is no pro-mass murder, gun, horrible tragedy constituency anywhere, right? But it makes the discussion of, clearly this is a deeply disturbed, mentally ill, unbalanced, unmedicated, whatever it is, but now we can't have a conversation about mental health because it seems like an excuse for racism and hate. And that I think is something that we are missing in the conversation, because clearly this is a deeply, deeply disturbed person, but now nobody could say that.
Let me go back to the debate over the flag and some of that that's gone on. And we've heard a lot of people say that, well, this is a South Carolina issue, should be debated in South Carolina. To me, that smacks of a cop-out, of not wanting to go on the record and say and potentially offend voters. And I'm curious, Dominic, do you think, A, it is a cop-out, and B, should presidential candidates of either party, both party, be put on the record about whether this flag should come down?
Well, we can say we want to put them on the record all we want to. They're not going to be boxed
Keep
down.
asking them questions until they answer.
You can keep asking, but they're not going to answer. I've been quiet throughout this debate because I'm really trying not to get started here tonight. Because once I get started, I don't think there's going to be any winding down.
Well, in that case, go ahead.
So maybe, I mean, first of all, I'm just going to tell you exactly how I feel. Dr. Carson is an embarrassment, and he needs to go sit down somewhere. In terms of
even on this,
well, he said the right thing on this, but he's lost all credibility, and he really needs to go sit down and retire as a brain surgeon. Who stepped down. He's done very good, pulled himself up by the bootstraps. The similar story is mine, but he needs to go sit down. President Obama was only telling the truth. I mean, I don't use the word. Most civil rights leaders I know on a personal level don't use the word, but he was telling the truth.
Well, then
he was telling the truth.
Let me ask you, and I want to ask everybody else. Clearly, this was something that the president planned. He didn't do anything without planning it out and how it's going to play. Why do you think the president used the actual N-word? Dominic, I'll start with you, but I want to get everybody else on this.
Because, okay, remember I've been telling you guys for months that as the first black president, when he leaves office, the book that he's going to write is going to be a doozy, and it's going to lead with race, and he's going to tell you that he believes, I really believe this, that all of his problems stem from the fact that he's a black man first in terms of dealing with Congress.
So why do you use the N-word?
Because he wanted to be forceful and have an impact, and why hide it? I mean, I'm a little torn, because imagine if another president of the United States had used that word. Oh, but he was telling the truth. But I mean, these two, they were doing a very good job here. I was watching the debate. But Republican candidates, and I'm not calling the entire Republican base racist, but they're not stepping out there because they don't want to offend people.
The president was being genuine, and he was being authentic. And if he didn't, then he would have been accused of being mealy-mouthed.
But he did it for a reason. What's the reason?
To be provocative. You can have that conversation. You can have that conversation and portray the same message without using that word. I just think that you are a holder of the office of the presidency, and I just don't think that any leader should be using that word. It's a shock factor.
Honest. There are times to say that standing by the use of the football name Redskins is offensive and racist, and it is. And you can't talk about East Ramapo without talking about issues of racism and anti-Semitism.
Just said the N-word. Right. He could have said the N-word instead of saying the N-word.
Right, because he did it for the shock factor. This is also the guy that said that people cling to religion and guns, which look at how people are coming together after Charleston. Would he still say the same thing to those people in AME Church, that they're clinging to religion to get through this tragedy? I mean, really, you have to be accountable for your words.
To be fair, he was speaking about different groups.
But can I just throw this out?
It doesn't matter.
Everybody at this table identifies to a degree with black culture. I'm going to say that on the record, okay? But do you think the president said something that every single black person in America doesn't agree with? I mean, he just put it out there, that's all. I agree. He just put it out there. I mean, any black person in America will tell you that they feel they've been discriminated against.
But he could have put it out there without putting it out there, without actually using the word.
But why not be honest? Why not be honest?
Why do you have to use the word? Why can't you say the same thing without furthering that term?
Okay,
it's gross.
Jessica, I really respect where you're coming from, but 9 people in Bible study killed a librarian, longtime librarian, a kid that just graduated from college, a woman in her 80s, the state senator, and the pastor. And then we can go back to all the police-related issues, whether we agree with them or not. And so these are the times that we live in. So why not, for lack of a better term, why not call a spade a spade?
Okay, I got to jump in. I'm going to jump in here because we are going to revisit this a little bit later in the show. We got to take a break, so hold on to your thoughts and arguments on this. We'll have time a little bit later on. Up next on RFL, though, still early, but the cream could be rising to the top of a packed GOP field. Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and Scott Walker are topping another poll. We're also learning more about some of the issues that matter to Republicans. One of them might surprise you.